Organized money.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that more people can get exposed to organized money. Really appreciate it. So it was like maybe January, February, March. I don't remember exactly when, but when Trump was doing lots of tariffy announcements and everybody took him seriously, Dave, you wrote a piece for The Prospect where you were like, this is not a trade war. This is just lawless oligarchy, something like that. And you went off on how this was not a trade war. And I didn't criticize the piece at the time because I thought, because Wall Street was going crazy, they were scared that the Wall Street stock market was going down. And I was like, hey, how could you not love the stock market's going down, right? And so I didn't criticize it, but I wasn't like, I thought there was a strategy here. I got to hand it to you. You were right. The trade stuff has been like Trump has done totally arbitrarily, like lots of stuff. He puts forward tariffs, then pulls them back, then puts them forward, then pulls them back. Yeah. It's all arbitrary and like nasty and weird, and there's no strategy, and it's very annoying.
Well, what I said at the time, and thank you for your humble apology. What I said
for not insulting you, even though I was doing it in my head. I'm apologizing to you.
There you go.
For being like, Dave's such an idiot, but not saying it. One time the filter worked.
What I said, yeah, that's surprising in and of itself. But what I said was these aren't really tariffs. They're like sanctions. They are ways for Trump to intimidate other countries and to force them into something that he wants. The problem maybe being that he doesn't know what he wants at every moment. And what he wanted in April when he made the announcement of all these huge tariffs was a different thing than what he wanted 2 weeks later after the stock market fell so much that he completely changed his view and said, okay, I'll give you guys and Wall Street whatever you want. But yeah, there's a sense that he's using trade for these ulterior motives, but those motives keep changing. And that's what makes it confusing.
Well, right. And that's the thing is that people keep hearing, oh, there's a tariff here, there's a tariff there. And then he strikes a deal and then, oh, the deal wasn't real and all this stuff. And I'm like, I pay attention to this stuff for like a living and I can't figure out what's going on. And I've just stopped listening because I don't care. I'm like, nothing seems to be changing at the supermarket. There's, importers are not freaking out anymore. Everyone on CNBC is always like, tariffs don't matter. It just feels like it's not a thing and whatever, like what, maybe.
Well, I mean, and I get that.
Stupid.
I get that, but that at some level, Trump has browbeaten everybody with these wild swings of what the tariffs are going to be, that he settled on something everyone is exhaling about, which is a pretty large baseline tariff of about 15% on most of the countries we trade with.
So we have a great guest, not just a good guest, a great guest to talk.
That's right.
To talk about this. I would take a different narrative, but we'll get into that. So the person who's coming on is actually a colleague of mine she runs a group called Rethink Trade. Her name is Lori Wallach, and she has been working in the trade space since the NAFTA fights of the 1990s, and is probably one of the most influential trade thinkers and lawyers in the world, actually. So
literally, if you had one person to make sense of all this chaos that has been going on for the last few months, it would be Lori.
Yeah, she has single-handedly stopped multiple trade agreements, and she has helped author other trade agreements that got enacted into law. It's a very impressive person. Okay, organized money. Let's get to it.
Lori Wallach, thank you for being on Organized Money.
Thank you.
Of course. So the first thing we want to get into is, back in April, there was the announcement of all these new tariffs. There was doom and gloom. There was an expectation of supply chain collapse. We were going to have empty shelves in stores. We even did episodes around that, what is coming to be, what's going to happen. And then, in these ensuing months, not a whole lot has really changed at the surface level. So the question is, what happened here that either diffused this or did everybody just get it wrong?
Well, the first thing that happened was the president, after 1 week, backed off on the highest tariffs. And within 2 weeks, had backed off on tariffs that were very high on China. So, on the one hand, we have higher tariffs than we've had historically for decades and decades because there is a 10% background tariff on everything.
Mhm.
Plus, with respect to automobiles and steel and aluminum, they're higher tariffs. And so, for instance, the government has collected more tariff revenue in the last 6 months than it typically does in many years at a time. At the same time, the super high tariffs have gone away. So we actually don't know what would happen if all of those scary things were going to happen if they had remained in place. And we're going to get a little bit of a taste of that as of the August 1 last deadline. That may or may not be something Trump changes his mind on. But assuming some more of these tariffs go into effect, we may get a little bit more of a taste about what it means to have higher tariffs.
We should say that we're taping the day before August 1st, and this you might hear this later, but that's when we're taping, when we're still in
Should we
that realm. No, I think it's fine.
July 31st is when we're
That would
taping.
be the day before
The day
August. Thank you
before.
for elucidating the calendar, Matt.
Yeah, yeah.
Appreciate it.
The so yeah, Lori, you and I have gone back and forth on this for a long time, and I'm just looking at this, what Trump has done, and I can't make heads or tails of it. Things just keep changing, and the tariff schedules are a mess, and nobody knows what's going on, and it doesn't feel like that much has changed. Certainly, none of the doomsday scenario came true, and I think it's like, and there's more collection of revenue, but it's not rivaling the income tax or anything like that. Um, so it's this whole situation is pretty confusing, and it feels a lot more like status quo than we had thought. Like if it touches the stock market, he doesn't, he changes his mind. But why don't we get into some of the basics? So, like, what there's a lot of people who say, like, what a tariff is just a tax paid by consumers who then pass, who are, it's passed on from businesses, and I guess like that's the explanation from sort of people who don't like, who love free trade and like NAFTA style like trade agreements. So why don't you define tariff, like maybe amend that explanation and what you think tariffs are actually for or could be for?
So a tariff is a charge on a good when it comes across the border. But who pays and who bears that cost is really a negotiation. So Trump is wrong when he says foreign governments are paying the US Treasury. It's never coming from the foreign governments. And the neoliberal free trader types are wrong when they say it's a guaranteed pass through to US consumers and always a new tax on us consumers. The reality is, for instance, with respect to the first 6 months of the second Trump administration and what are historically higher tariffs, the data show that largely the companies in other countries that are sending imports to the US have bared most of the cost of the tariffs because they want to maintain the US market. And, the only upside of having $1 trillion trade deficit year after year is the whole damn world's pretty reliant on selling you things. So things that in economics 101 would happen in external reality in almost any other country in the planet do not necessarily pertain to the US because there isn't some alternative to just quickly say, well, screw you, that tariff's no good, I'm going elsewhere. So in this instance, there's been a lot of negotiation. There's been an attempt by a lot of the companies in other countries to basically eat some of the cost in their profit margin, or they're splitting it with the US companies. That is more or less what happened with the China tariffs in Trump's first term as well.
Mm.
Now, what happens when it gets higher than the 10% that's generally in effect now remains to be seen. But what's happened up until now, on about $100 billion of tariff revenue in the first half, which is, more than's been collected in an entire year of tariff revenue, even with the China tariffs in the past in decades. So far, the pass through hasn't been so severe. Now, how can you use tariffs? Let me just start by saying what Trump is doing is basically every aspect of malpractice one could conceive of, and then he's come up with a few no one thought of before. So, by having the on and off tariffs, having tariff by whim, targeting the wrong countries, having like something wrong for breakfast and deciding to end the tariff and then start a tariff means there's no certainty. And so we've practically seen existing investment in new manufacturing factories chilled, stopped. We've seen new plans that say the industrial policy funding of the Biden administration had started to get kicked up and geared up on ice because no businesses know what the condition is going to be next week, much less next year, that they have to plan for to decide what they're going to invest in. So as far as the underlying theme of ostensibly what Trump was doing tariffs for, to rebalance U.S. trade, rebuild our manufacturing, it's been counterproductive. It's not just that it's not enough or it's not quite working out. It's actually been counterproductive to have tariff by whim, tariff by roller coaster, because it's chilling investment. How you could use tariffs is in a mix of policies. And you would use tariffs as a defense to try and keep out imports of things that are being produced either under unfair conditions. So, suppressed wages because you crush independent unions, or, crazy subsidies that make it just impossible to compete, or currency that you have devalued your currency to basically make it cheaper to sell stuff relative to where you're sending it. All of those kind of trade cheating things, you use a tariff to basically keep that kind of stuff out of your market. Because if you're going to use the other industrial policies that stimulate demand for domestic goods, so things you can do with government procurement policy, things you can do with consumer taxes, or you're pushing on investment, you have tax policies that make it easier to put money into new factories. When you're doing the whole mix, you're training workers, you got the whole package, then you want to keep out the cheating stuff so it doesn't smush the market that you are trying to stimulate for the domestic production. So that's a very strategic use of tariffs. Sometimes, if there's not cheating, you just decide we can't be a country unless we can produce X, Y, and Z. And so then we need to have some space to make that. You use tariffs to actually create a domestic market by yourself, kind of using a mercantilist policy to keep out the competitors. But Trump's use of tariffs is not combined with all those things. If anything, he's killing those other policies. And then the chaos of it means it's really been counterproductive with respect to either trade balancing or stimulating manufacturing. And we're about to get a big data dump in the beginning of August that's actually going to empirically prove that on the basis of the trade data, the manufacturing indices, et cetera.
So, yeah, you say you could use tariffs to say we want these industries X, Y, Z to be strong and not strangled as they're emerging. But what Trump's tariffs are is kind of A through Z, right? I mean, they're not discriminating between one. They're not treating semiconductors in a different approach as bananas. For the most part, there are some specific tariffs on specific sectors, but the baseline tariffs on everything, and not a targeted tariff that has specific goals. So, what are the downsides of that approach? Because maybe there are some things that get caught up in that simply aren't suitable for us to produce in the U.S.
Well, it's even worse than that, to be honest, because when you're thinking of targets, you're thinking of two things: what country and what products. So Trump's targeting is basically by sort of despotic whim, flattery, random political upset. So here's an example. Yesterday, we put a 50% tariff. Let me start over. Let me give you an example. At the end of July, we enacted a 50% tariff on Brazil, a country with which the United States has a trade surplus. We send more exports of our stuff to Brazil than we buy from Brazil, not the country that you would target with a tariff if you were trying to rebalance trade and build manufacturing. Rather, that is your partner who you are selling manufacturing stuff to. Okay, why then would that country be picked? Is there some particular trade thing they're doing that's annoying? No, because Donald Trump has solidarity with failed coup leader Jair Bolsonaro, the former president, and maybe, but for the slowness and lack of spine of a certain attorney general go I, thinking about himself being a coup leader who failed going to court, is attacking Brazil for having court hearings and a trial on a failed coup and the potential accountability over the former right-wing president. So he is literally hitting them with tariffs in solidarity with Jair Bolsonaro, a former right-wing coup.
And I want to get into that, the use of trade as a geopolitical weapon. But the key thing, I think, on those Brazil tariffs is that most of the products they actually export to the US are exempted from the 50% tariff. And that's another example, I think, of Trump making rhetorical statements about tariff and then, changing the rules in the fine print. The copper tariffs that he put out they mostly exempt the key trading material that is actually like the refined copper, right? Like, so is this trade war or is this just rhetoric that masks, a business as usual approach?
Well, with respect to Brazil, their stuff is largely covered. Like, we're going to feel it in the coffee. Their stuff is mainly covered. So
I thought orange juice and some of that other stuff wasn't covered at all.
There are two tracks of tariffs. There are these sort of across the board punitive country specific tariffs, or for everyone, the 10% tariffs. And then there's specific sectoral tariffs. And when it comes to Brazil, they're stacking. So Brazil will have the steel and aluminum tariffs or the auto tariffs. And then on top of that are these punitive tariffs, which it's 40% punitive, 10% that they were paying before, actually. So it's the Bolsonaro tariff is 40%. And the exclusions list, that I have not seen exclusions list that has, for instance, what you would do, which are called tropical products, all the stuff that we can't possibly make, which, by the way, footnote, should have been excluded from the 10% across the board tariffs from day one. Right. And there was a list like that. And President, I will do it on my own, basically looked at the list that is only pain and no gain and said, like, no, I will still tariff coffee, chocolate, pineapples, and mangoes. Why the hell not? So I have not seen that exclusion list that actually is an effective one. And under the IEPA, the statute that they're using, there are some things that have to be excluded, which include certain bizarre cultural publications, films, etc. There's an exclusion. But that's the only stuff I've seen on the exclusion list.
I think civilian aircraft like Embraer is excluded. That's not going to be increased above the 10% tariff. Orange juice was the other one I saw, and several others. So, I mean, I do think the larger point that, there's more than meets the eye in these tariffs often is pretty accurate.
So here's a question that I think is like a little bit, this is a very strange situation to be, like, I think for most people to be paying attention to, because there's a lot of nonsense coming from the economists about what tariffs do. As you noted, like, a lot of the tariff costs have been absorbed by the profits of foreign companies, which doesn't seem like a bad thing. But also, like, the president is just doing all this stuff. And it seems weird that he can just impose tariffs on anyone for any reason. Like, what, don't we have Congress? Like, how can he just do this? Like, what's the law here? How does he do this?
That's the very topic of today, of a oral argument. Let me start over. Funny, that's the very topic of a major oral argument in front of 11 federal judges en banc at appeals in the Federal Circuit District right now today. Oh, fuck, I just did it again. I'm trying to make it not time specific.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about
that.
You just say, no, don't worry about that.
You say today.
No, it's a podcast. It's fine.
It's fine.
Funny you mentioned that.
We already joked about the date up front.
So now all bets are off.
Yep.
Funny you mentioned that, because today in the Federal District Appeals Court for the Federal Circuit, there are 11 en banc judges trying to decide that very question, because there are challenges saying that Trump doesn't have authority under the statute that he's used, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. You sometimes hear that called IEPA. That statute has been challenged from numerous directions, that what Trump is trying to do, claiming he can just unilaterally rewrite all the tariff schedules, is not authority that exists under that statute. And the main argument is the US Constitution does give exclusive authority in Article 1(8) to Congress. And this is a strong historical background, which is, in a way, the US was formed in a trade war. When the king decided he wanted more revenue, he put on all of these tariffs on tea, i.e., we all know about the Boston Tea Party, but that was actually a trade war. And so when the Constitution was being written, the founders gave control over tariffs and separate clause international commerce to Congress, the body closest to the people. And the idea was that no king, no president could just unilaterally do what, oops, Trump is doing, which is to just announce, declare by whim, by fiat, what one day pisses him off, another day is a foreign policy issue, another day is maybe he thinks he's doing something smart for manufacturing. That's not an authority that the Constitution really gives to a president. So we're going to see by the end of this year, the very beginning of next year, we suspect the Supreme Court will ultimately take this case. We're going to see if he has this authority or not. And it may well be that he doesn't. However, there are a bunch of other statutes that are more narrow, that take more homework to use, that would let a president legally put in place a bunch of tariffs, just not quite as arbitrarily as we see today.
So, I want to reemphasize something that we talked about a little bit earlier, which was, so on Liberation Day, on April 2nd, there were these announcements of imposition of all these tariffs, and the stock market fell pretty precipitously for about a week or so. And then Trump put those tariffs on hold for, I think, 90 days. And then eventually the Chinese tariffs on hold. And that blinking, that was like a hinge point, it seems like. Like there was a moment before then where he was even saying, well, I guess investors are going to have a problem. I don't know. We have to do this for our country. And then he totally went off that track. And it leads to this dynamic where, and I think it informs all these on again, off again things and these little deals in the fine print. Trump tries above all to keep Wall Street happy. I mean, is that kind of how you see it now since April, since that blinking hinge point?
Well, there's yes, and because we're also seeing a pretty disgusting additional kind of George W. Trump standard Republican, let's please a bunch of corporate donors, friends, and whoever happens to be in the White House or golf course or wherever he runs into them. And it's playing out where, for instance, candidate Trump attracted a lot of working class voters' support, saying he was going to use tariffs to rebalance trade and rebuild American manufacturing. And those are actually two totally valid goals. Whomever is president should do those things. It's in the national interest. But the reality is, he is now prioritizing in these deals, and these deals are sort of tariff relief. I'm going to hit you over the head with the tariff stick unless you sign this deal. Is the deal going at fixing the things that cause the imbalance, that are flooding with unfair imports? No, it's goodies for big tech. Hey, country, I'm going to smack you with tariffs unless you get rid of your big tech anti-monopoly laws and you don't tax those guys and you screw up consumer privacy rules. Or, hey, country, I'm going to smack you upside the head with a tariff unless you import a bunch of big oils, carbon products, and agree to do that instead of wherever else you're getting your energy. Or you have to take this big ag stuff. None of those imports are going to balance trade. We don't have, sorry. None of those exports are going to rebalance trade. Our trade imbalance is not an export problem. Our trade imbalance is an import and finance also problem. So what he's doing basically is both not fixing the real problem, but also using this leverage he got from tariffs to deliver for a bunch of the usual suspect, standard Republican, big corporate interests. And what's worse, he's actually rolling back tariffs in areas where, if I were the tariff czarina, I would keep them in place or I would extract something for them. Namely, and almost everyone has missed this, he has just announced big deals, woohoo, the top lines with Japan, Korea, and the European Union. Those three entities are about 80% of the US ginormous trade deficit in autos and auto
Mhm.
parts.
Mhm.
Mexico's the rest of it. So if you were facing 25% tariffs, which all of those countries imported autos and auto parts were already under a trade law called Section 232. And now Trump makes a great deal for you. Oh, yeah, for you, the importer, not for the American auto worker. They cut them all to 15% tariffs and they didn't extract anything. So if you look at the UAW's website, where they have a very angry news release about the Japan deal, they said you cut from 25 to 15%, and you allow all these multinational companies to continue to source. These Japanese makers are sourcing in, Burma, Cambodia,
Right.
Vietnam, horrible
And
conditions,
and
low wages, and they didn't
it's worse than
extract
that.
anything.
And it's worse than that, right? Because the steel coming over as components for auto production in the United States are at a higher tariff rate than the 15% tariff on assembled vehicles coming in from overseas. Isn't that the
Oh, it's even
case?
worse. It's worse. The North American autos and auto
Yeah.
parts that are from Mexico or Canada, not just the steel, the auto sector is still at 25%.
The whole
So
auto
yes,
sector. Yeah.
so all of that stuff in North America, which is the only trade agreement, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement and its rapid response labor rights system is the only enforceable labor standards of any trade agreement in the world. And those imports face a 25% tariff. But the stuff coming from Vietnam, Cambodia,
Right.
you name it, Romania, all that supply chain where there's really low wages and crappy standards, nothing was done to leverage cutting from 25% to 15% to improve any of that. But we have 25% holding out the tariffs.
I,
It's crazy.
so I want to take, we didn't always do trade policy this way. So I want to go back to a time when we did things more reasonably, rationally, competently. And it was under a president named Donald Trump, from 2017 to 2021, um, when it was a very different trade framework. I remember he came in and he was like, we got to get these factories back up, and they did a bunch of stuff. And it's not, they were not asking for, like, you know, we need to do this favor for Google, right? Or we're mad at you because of your internal politics around Bolsonaro or whatever. There was a very different approach. And there also wasn't this, like, I'm going to impose tariffs and then I'm going to change my mind like tomorrow. So he had a more targeted style, and he had a different trade representative, this guy named Robert Lighthizer, someone that you know. What was the difference between that first term and now? Withdrew us from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, renegotiated NAFTA, like, um, and you know, yeah. What's the difference? I mean, was it reasonable what he was doing the first term, and now has gone crazy, or was it terrible then and we just didn't know, or we did know? Like, what's the difference?
I think the number one difference is Trump has decided that he himself will dictate the policy by whim. So he does have some very smart, knowledgeable staff.
Wait, let's go back to the first term. So how did it work in the first term?
So in the first term, there were a lot more processes of what the policies would be. And there were big fights because, for instance, the first term Treasury Secretary Mnuchin absolutely hated Trump's tariff policies, as
Mhm.
did some of their other, very corporate oriented neoliberal free trade advisors. And so there was always a battle where Bob Lighthizer, the trade representative, and a couple other people would be in there, particularly making the case about China, where he could get support from the national security team. That wasn't just an economic issue, but a security issue. They fought their way through putting in place using a statute that clearly gave authority to the president. So it's not like the whole rug could get pulled up from under the whole program. They did the investigation. The statute's called Section 301. There's a process. They did exclusions to let off some steam. So, like, if you couldn't get that partner, it was going to shut down a whole auto plant. You got 18 months to find a new source. They did a kind of professional, organized process, and they duked it out. Now, the one thing is, because you had Mnuchin and company, a whole bunch of things they needed to do to really make the first term policy translate into the outcomes all got blocked. So on the one hand, the China tariffs were much more rational. The whole use of tariffs was much more rational. They did some of the 232s, the targeted sectoral tariffs. It was all, done in a fairly rational way. However, they only got so far. Now, they did get a drop in the China trade deficit, and they did get some investment in domestic manufacturing. You can see that in all the investment manufacturing indicators. But unfortunately, in trade, you have a squeeze balloon problem, which is if you don't deal with the whole macro mess, which involves partly the finance part of it, but also you have to get all the mercantilists at once. If you just squeeze the China balloon, what happened is, shocker, trade deficit with China went down by $200 billion, and the trade deficit with Mexico went up $100 billion, and with Vietnam, $110 billion, and then even more over time. So what had to have happened, basically Mnuchin and company blocked. So now you get to the second term. In this instance, the process of coming up with good policies is there, but every time they come up with something that seems like a sane way of using the proper authorities, that is slightly slower, it is slightly less dramatic, the authorized tariff level can't be randomly high, the president just blows it up. And so there is less of a pushback. There is no Mnuchin, but there also is a process. And in the end, a lot of this is literally whoever's in the president's ear, and the president calls the shot. I mean, just by way of example, that set of letters about tariffs that the president sent out threatening countries, you better do this. I mean, it looked like the Unabomber.
I like that you're like, I'm like, oh, which set of letters threatening?
Right.
Like, you're going to have to be more specific. Sorry,
go on. More recent.
The more recent. Oh, yeah. No, I don't know. I don't follow it all, but we'll take your word for it.
They were only posted on social media. I have this vision of him on the can in the morning. Like
why are you sharing these visions? Why are you doing
Sorry.
this? This is not
now
okay.
You all need to be in therapy.
I appreciate it. This is not cool.
They don't now just contemplate this. As a lawyer, I have to go look at the executive orders. And by the way, David, you are right. I saw the draft Brazil executive order didn't have the exclusions. While we've been talking, I popped up the final one. There are new exclusions.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, you are right, but it's that rando that like the version that almost was posted.
It is that random. And it seems to me that the announcement of a deal is more important than what the details are.
I mean, the other thing is these guys, they announce a deal, and then like a day later, they're like, oh, actually, there are disagreements about what the deal means. And this happened with Japan. It happened with the EU. It's like England. It just keeps happening where they're like, oh, we have a deal. And then, or China. And then it's just like, they don't. But
just to finish on these tariff letters and how rando this is, they don't exist on any website of USTR or the White House. To find the letters under which basically a bunch of these threats are made, you must go back into Truth Social and find particular tweets, basically.
Right.
Only existence.
That's how policy is conducted.
So that is the level of like, and they're coming out at bizarre ass times of the night and day. So that is literally like how policy is getting conducted.
And the announcements are being done in that fashion, I feel like, as well. And there's just a lot of fake numbers that are often thrown into these deals. So, there was something like this in the first term where China promised to buy a bunch of agricultural exports, and then they didn't, and nobody cared, and they moved on. And it's the same kind of thing. Like in the EU deal, they say, oh, we're going to purchase $750 billion in liquefied natural gas over the next 3 years. And you literally couldn't do that with the current infrastructure of what you need to transport LNG.
But that's why. So getting back to the beginning, this is why so much of it seems fake. Like, I just don't believe. And also, if your business nobody knows what's going on in business. They're all just sort of like, oh, whatever. Right.
So, but
this
here's
just
the
seems
thing.
fake to me. All of it.
The dramatic stuff is fake. So, I mean, not only is the LNG not transportable at that volume, but also like if we really sold all of that LNG to other countries, because we also have made Japan promise to get 200 billion of it.
Right.
So like if everyone bought what they on paper said that Trump could brag about, every like time you turned on the lights in your house, you'd have to cha-ching $100 because there would be no energy left in the U.S.
It's like the producers.
Exactly.
Right.
But anyway, separate from the fact we'd all be freezing in long underwear using a candle here, there is also a piece of this that is real, and then a piece of it that's totally performative. And so, for instance, some of these, energy buying deals, some of the stuff that's like such and such country agrees to invest so much money, billions and billions, and Donald Trump gets to decide exactly where it's going, and the US gets the profit. And then you read what the other country says. And the other country says, our companies have annually invested $200 billion. We probably will do that in the future years. Let's multiply
Right.
it by 3 and call it a commitment. So a lot of it is bullshit. But the reality is there are 10% tariffs in place. And now with these other deals, there will be 15% tariffs in place on all US trade, all imports coming from the EU, from Japan, from Korea. It's not the 25% that should be on cars, but it's not nothing.
Right.
Because prior to those 15%, and then right now the 10%, a huge amount of that was duty free. And even the
Right.
stuff like cars was 2.5% versus, the rate in Europe for cars is 10%, China's 15%. So having 10 or 15% tariffs for the US is a real thing. So far, it hasn't had the inflationary or there's been some price gouging. And it's price gouging because the price is going up here, but you also know that the company selling the thing to the retailer in the US is paying for the tariff. But there's been some of that. But so far, we have not seen, there's been some real tariff impact, and then there's been a huge amount of hype and bullshit. And now, after August 1, we're going to see, for instance, there is 25% tariffs ostensibly on everything from India. That is not a small amount of trade if that actually happens. We're going to see the 15% tariffs on everything from a bunch of our other big trade partners. We're going to see ostensibly some really high tariffs that are smaller volume but specific things. So like your favorite tropical fruit could suddenly get super expensive. And we're going to have to see how that plays out if, to get back to your original theme, he doesn't change his mind and extend
Right.
everything again.
Right.
I have to say, I mean, all right, I don't want to get into my own frustrations about the world right now, but so let's go to some good news, okay? Assuming Trump doesn't change his mind on stuff. And I mean, we all sound very partisan, and we're all Democrats, but I just want to make it clear to listeners, Lori is not a partisan on trade. She has worked with Republicans, with Democrats. I think a lot of the stuff that Trump did when removing the TP, ending the Trans-Pacific Partnership, renegotiating NAFTA, these were things that Lori was supportive of. It's just there's an element of frustration I think I want to offer here, but it isn't like your normie Democrat, I don't like Trump thing.
No,
but with
and
that,
can I just say something about that, just so everyone understands my bias? I am so frustrated and upset because they're misusing tariffs in a way that hurts the long-term viability of the tool. So I am not
Right.
one of those Democrats who's like, oh my God, it's going to raise prices, or oh, we should never have a tariff. Rather, I'm upset because they're taking a very important tool and a different approach to trade, which looks at the fact you should be managing it and figuring out what outcomes you want. And they're screwing up the implementation 100% of a theory that actually I agree a
Yeah.
large part.
So let's go to some good news that, I mean, I think was it yesterday or today? There was an announcement that the Trump administration was ending something called de minimis for the whole world, which what is that? And what did they just do? Why is that good news?
So a lot of people, your mind will be blown if you haven't heard about this, but there has historically been an exception in US trade law for the last 10 years that allows up to $800 per person per day to be imported with no inspection, no tariffs, and no taxes. And the big online retailers have largely exploited this to have all kinds of forced labor goods that are banned, to have fentanyl-laced pills slipping in, endangered species products, all kinds of stuff that is dangerous, fake, banned, dreadful, is coming in 4 million packages a day, almost all of it from China, bought online. And that was because of what is called the de minimis exception to the customs rules. De minimis ostensibly being a small amount, $800. But of course, if it's $800 per day per person, it ain't small. It's been billions and billions, probably at this point, though it's not documented, so we don't know for sure. But we're guessing it's around $150 billion a year of this stuff, which is a lot. So what happens is a very odd coalition of domestic manufacturers, families who have lost people to fentanyl, people who literally have bought what they thought was a generic version of some pain pill muscle relaxer, which turns out to be a fake pharmacy online where someone has like ground a little bit of fentanyl into some white powder. You don't do it professionally. The little bits are too much. Person takes 3 of the pills, they're fine. Their back feels better in the morning. They take the 4th pill, they never wake up because they're dead. So all of those families where it's not people who are taking drugs regularly, but these people who have been injured by these online pills, some manufacturers and distributors in the small business sector who are basically being screwed where they pay the tariff, but Amazon sells the same bike and doesn't have to. A lot of consumer activist groups who have had people horribly injured, had houses burned down by this fake stuff. All these groups got together and they put together a really strange right-left coalition of members of Congress. And ultimately, miraculously, against the Amazons, Temus, Sheins, FedExes, UPSs, Congress eventually actually passed a phase out of this loophole, but it doesn't start until the middle of 2027. And then on the 30th of July, by executive order, the administration said, well, we're not waiting until then. We're shutting it down today for the whole world. So as of the end of August, every package that comes in is going to have the full customs information, and it's going to actually face the tariffs and the taxes and all the normal stuff. And it means it's going to be easier to inspect because we're going to know what's in there. Now, we have to see it implemented the right way. There are plenty of ways it's screwed up.
Do we have the infrastructure to do that at this moment?
So the thing that is a very clever thing that they're doing is they're requiring all of this stuff, actually, the data for it gets filed online. It used to be with de minimis, you could just in a post office or, FedEx write like socks. And in fact, it could be something totally illegal, like some endangered species product, and send it in. They're now going to require every package be registered online through the online US customs system. That will really help what's called risk assessment, where they actually target, all right, if it's from that country, or if it's that category of stuff that can often be unsafe, then it'll be easier. Now, it's not going to be perfect. And one of the things that we've continued to demand, and if folks want to get into the details of all of this, there's a sort of good memo explaining it all. And there's also a news release about what still has to happen at our website, which is rethinktrade.org. But what we're calling for is improvements in customs enforcement, because there still are things that need to happen to make sure, for sure, they're going to start collecting all of those tariffs and taxes that have screwed small manufacturers, have screwed small business retailers. That's all good. But if we want it to also translate into safer trade, that the inspections are better and we're catching the illegal and dangerous and deadly stuff, then we need to boost the customs system so that more information is required, that more targeting is done, and that, frankly, there are higher penalties. So that if customs brokers cheat, they lose their license. They don't just pay a little fine. That would actually help a lot.
So that's an example of kind of taking on big shippers, big companies that do retail, online retail, and things like that. But you alluded before to the ways in which the administration's trade policy, in part, is operating kind of as the personal lobbyist around the world for big tech, particularly in Canada, where the digital services taxes were repealed as a preliminary to negotiations. They did this, I think, in Indonesia as well. And what strikes me is that when I was writing about trade, like in the Obama administration, what I was saying was that, okay, well, it's called trade, but really it's this sort of corporate bullying where they get other countries to do things to their sovereign laws that they would never get through their own legislatures. And that's what this is. Even though Trump kind of came to power railing against the way trade had been done historically for 30, 40 years. The use of trade as a geopolitical weapon is exactly what populists were so angry about. And yet this seems to be exactly what Trump is doing in that instance, right?
I mean, as I was saying, even one worse. They're taking the 25% tariffs on an actual manufactured good we need to make here where there is trade cheating, cars and car parts. They are dropping it to 15% in exchange for doing things like Indonesia rolling back their privacy laws and their
Right.
big tech monopoly policies. And, with Indonesia, they really put the gun to their head. Indonesia had led all the developing countries at the World Trade Organization in a fight to do of whether you can tax what they call digital products sold online. So if you, get games or a movie or music online, can the government tax that as if the same thing was being sold in a CD someplace in a store? And the developing world is saying you have to, because so much of products now are conveyed that way. If we lose all that revenue, we'll never have a road, a clinic, a school. And so Indonesia had been leading a huge block of developing countries saying, no, we're not going to have the WTO impose a ban on taxation of how you deliver certain
Right.
things that are products. The US made them reverse course and announced that they will support the permanent moratorium on those kind
Mm.
of taxes. And that to me is the biggest gun to the head flip flop on a thing totally unrelated to trade, but totally related to development, to the ability to have schools and hospitals and roads. And that kind of, really slow motion coup d'etat against democratic processes by trade
Mhm.
leverage is a lot of what this administration is doing. And they're trading away the actual manufacturing. That's like, if
Right.
it couldn't, how could it possibly be worse than using our trade leverage to do corporate bagman stuff that's bad for the world? Oh, also undermining our domestic trade goals.
Right. If you get rid of your democracy, we'll trade you our middle class. That
That's
seems
it.
like solid work. Okay, so although don't tempt them, don't say how could it be worse? Because I feel like
Right. Yeah.
that's a challenge to them. All right, so uh, I guess one of our maybe this is last or second to last question. Very basic. Uh, these tariffs, hit or some of them did or whatever, right? Um, is it going to increase consumer prices?
Totally depends. So here is the problem. We're never going to know if prices go up, we're not going to know it's the tariffs. So every corporation wants to price gouge, and they'll use the tariff as an excuse to raise prices. And a bunch haven't, but a bunch have, and they've said in advance, oh, this is a tariff price increase. Now that's totally shonky because in fact, they did that when there was a 100% tariff on stuff from China. And they said, oh, have to raise the price. Then they froze that tariff after a few days, and we did not see the prices go back down. So that's fake. On the other hand, if there really are bigger, higher tariffs on certain things that the exporting company can't absorb, you could see pass throughs. We haven't seen it, and we didn't see it in the first use of tariffs on China in Trump's first term. It certainly is not the sloppy math you see a lot of neoliberal sort of knee-jerk anti, trade justice people
Right.
use, where they just say like, okay, here's the total tariff divided by the population divided by whatever. That's the tax for every person. That's just
Right.
horse shit. It's
Right.
much more complicated. And by the way, it really depends also about how much competition there is in the sector. Because if it's a monopolized sector where they're just one or two players, they're not worried about losing market share because they're like two of them have split everything up. There's more opportunity to jack up prices.
So
Versus if
that,
there's actual competition, then the company's thinking like, all right, I may just have to take it on my profit margin.
so there's kind of opportunity there where they can raise prices more than whatever increases in input costs or increases from tariffs are, and then use the tariff as an excuse.
Well, here's the classic example. Anyone, sadly, who listened to MSNBC or NPR believes that in Trump term one, tariffs increased the price of washers and dryers.
Right.
This is not true because there were
No. MSNBC and NPR never say things that aren't true. They're good liberal outlets. What do you mean, Lori? They're always saying, I'm sorry. I don't have any energy to finish the sarcasm.
Yeah. You.
I just lost it. I used to be
Wow.
like,
You've ground down Matt's sarcasm.
Nothing matters. They've bittered. Embittered. Yeah. All right. Keep going.
Answer the question.
Yes.
I bet
Washer
you never
dryers.
took off your flip-flop and smacked your radio while driving, listening to NPR repeat this, which I actually did in a fit of rage. So there were never tariffs on dryers. There were no tariffs on dryers. So when dryer prices went up, that was just corporate price gouging because confused consumers had been told by MSNBC and NPR that the prices would go up in dryers. And so the dryer guys said, like, well, shit, we can put the prices up on dryers. Let's make some profit.
Was it that there were tariffs on washers, and often people buy those as a match set? So the dryer people were like, yeah, let's go.
Here's the thing about the washers. So the washers did have tariffs, particularly on the steel, not on the, well, there were some on the washers, but mainly it was a steel thing.
Okay.
But the margin, because the manufacturing of washers is now so consolidated, there are 3 or 4 manufacturers who make all the brands. And so the markup is so high already, so that the actual wholesale price of the washer is such a gap between what the retailers charge for the extra bells and whistles and the brand that actually that amount of markup was way more than what the increase on either the aluminum and steel in there or the actual tariff would be. Because a bunch of them are actually made in North America and the tariff didn't apply. So there was a huge fake markup. And get this, the prices went up in Canada on washers and dryers, where there are no US tariffs applied,
right?
Because the same marketing was done for the Canadian audience, and they also got the same fake markup. That's an example that is like proved to the dime, but there are lots of examples like that.
Yeah. Okay. Last question for me is the other thing that we hear around all these tariffs and just generally Trump's economic policy is it's creating this uncertainty that a retailer or a producer doesn't know what's going to happen from one day to the next, and that's that's a problem for investment. You won't invest if you don't know what the rules are going to be. We're kind of easing into the rules now, right? There's going to be this global baseline tariff rate of around 15%. And it may not be good and it may not serve a lot of goals, but it is somewhat certain, or at least more certain for the moment. So, is that going to have an economic impact that there's going to be more certainty, or was certainty always kind of a ruse anyway?
No, certainty is a real thing. And what we're going to see going forward is the reason they have picked the 15%, by the way, is they're clearly hedging on the chance that the courts throw out their use of that particular statute, IEPA, that they have as the basis for the tariffs now, because there's another law, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1962, that allows tariffs up to 15% for a 5-month period to be imposed unilaterally by a president for trade imbalance. And so they are hedging that they can keep that 15% even if they lose in court on IEPA, pretty flawlessly. They can switch over to Section 122. There's not a lot of process. So for companies, because a lot of companies call and say, like, what do you think is going to happen next? Or, company advisory groups say, what do you think is going to happen next? And I think there will be a persistent, fairly consistent 15% tariff for most, that's going to cover most of our trade. I think it's a little less clear what's going to happen with these Section 232 tariffs. Those are the sectoral ones. So, like, for instance, it's interesting. I skimmed over the report for the copper tariffs, and the president actually decided to go at a higher rate than was recommended. He supported the scope. So keeping out the raw materials and the finished was part of what the report said. Those weren't the problems. The problems was the stuff in the middle. So he targeted the stuff in the middle, but he went at a higher rate than was recommended. But then on the other hand, there was supposed to be a phase-in of even broader tariffs on the other categories, and he rejected that. So with that kind of is that going to stick in the sectors? That stuff is still super fishy. So I think in sectors where you're going to be at 15%, we should start to see more ability for companies to decide, hey, I'm going to have to invest more in the US and make it here. Or if they ever sort out the US Mexico Canada agreement, the revised NAFTA, maybe there'll be North American investment. I mean, at the same time that North American cars are being screwed under this current arrangement, everything that isn't cars that meets the USMCA rules is duty-free right now. And it's the only duty-free entrance into the US for trade in the world. So that's an incredible attraction of investment to go to Mexico and Canada if you comply by the rules of origin, the rules on how much content has to be in North America, for instance, to get that benefit. So I think we could start to see some shifts. I would just say that at the very beginning of August, we're going to get the 6-month trade data. That's going to show the trade deficit is way up, not down, which is what Trump's goal was. And so far, the manufacturing indicators are showing that at a minimum, manufacturing is flat, but in a bunch of the indicators are starting to show a decline. So will the stability of the 15% start to turn that around? We did see a boom in manufacturing when Lighthizer and his more sane tariffs went into effect and really kicked in the first term. I think it remains to be seen, given how much damage has been done by Trump's sort of oligarchic, you're my friend, you're my enemy, I'm carving this out for you, Mr. Apple, I'm putting this in. That may undermine even what is pretty much known consensus will be at 15% at a minimum. It remains to be seen.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming on and letting us know what's going on in tariff land until tomorrow when Trump makes another, puts a personal.
We're gonna have to have you on every day just to.
It was just announced he personally tariffed you, Lori.
I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's a great pleasure. I love the show. But here's the thing I have to say, given last night in the course of like 12 hours, de minimis went down, a trade deal with South Korea was announced. The fact that there wasn't a real deal with the UK after 6 weeks of saying there was a deal was announced. So much chaos occurred. I thought, will it matter if we wait a day or two, or should we just dive in?
We're gonna have flashing lights in the video and a disclaimer throughout subliminally throughout all the
disclaimer.
audio.
Disclaimer.
This is happening on July 31st. This is probably all subject to change.
Disclaimer being nothing matters. Nothing matters. All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Right. Thanks, Laurie. I find talking about trade kind of annoying. I'm not going to lie, because not.
Thank you for spending an hour talking about an annoying subject.
We have to talk about trade, but it's not annoying because trade is a boring subject or anything. I think trade is fascinating. It's annoying because it's all arbitrary and Trump changes his mind all the time, and so it's impossible to actually have a conversation about what he's doing because we don't know what he's doing. What I pay attention to on trade is Wall Street, right? And they were freaking out until, throughout August, up from January until the end of August. They were like, oh my gosh.
Let's stop you down. You mean through April.
Sorry.
You said August. Yeah.
Sorry. So I would pay attention to Wall Street. They were freaking out from like January. They got increasingly freaking out until April when Trump did his Liberation Day. And the stock market was like crashing, and all these people, we did stories on podcast episodes with people who were freaking out, importers. And then, Trump watches a segment of Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, on TV. I think he was on Fox News, maybe, saying, he's got to pull back on these tariffs. And Trump is like, you know what, Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan CEO, seems like he knows what he's talking about. He pulls back on the China tariffs. Wall Street just goes skyrockets. And since then, it's really just been like, if you're doing something that affects stock prices, Trump's doing something, he pulls back on it. And so people have just kind of stopped paying attention to tariffs because it's clear they're not real. And corporations most of them think it's not real, and it's just like silly.
I think two things. I think that moment where he changed his position and said, I'm going to pause these tariffs and I'll just do what Wall Street says is good. Tariffs aren't the only policy that Trump is pursuing, right? I mean, he's pursuing a lot of different policies. Many of them are friendly to Wall Street.
Export controls is another one.
Exactly. And because he has decided to keep tariffs in a tolerable zone, like a zone that Wall Street can live with, and he's giving them things on other aspects, whether it's export controls or runaway merger policy, that no longer does tariff policy provoke this kind of anxiety.
I think that's right. And one of the things that Lori said is that we've been collecting a lot more tariff revenue, and that's something that Trump likes to talk about. And that's true. Yeah. It is about, my understanding is about $200 billion this year, and it was about, I don't know, $90 billion last year, something like that. It sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but our economy is $30 trillion. So it's not like, it matters, but it's like, we're talking, we're talking not even 1% of GDP, but less than 1% of GDP.
Right.
Much less.
And it's much less than what he threatened.
Yeah.
And what he threatened is what sunk stock prices. And then when he essentially said, even if he didn't say it explicitly, I'm going to keep this in a level that's not going to sink your stock price, then, Wall Street kind of wrote it off.
And I think most people have written it off too. And it just doesn't.
Well, that's why consumer sentiment, by the way, is going up. Because there was a lot of kind of media fueled anxiety about what was going to happen because of these tariffs. And over the months, as it didn't happen, and we're
it's not just media fueled. I mean, let's be clear. He just changed his policies. Like,
well, he did change his policy. Sure.
It's not like the media ginned it up. Like, everyone was freaking out for a reason. We talked to manufacturers who were freaking out, and then they're like, "Oh, it's fine because now we're not going to have to deal with these tariffs." So
right.
So
and the public has taken notice of that. Is my point.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, I feel like I have at least some more understanding of the haphazard approach that Trump is taking, and what really
honestly,
matters.
He's doing this. He's doing this in a lot of areas. Like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not like being like, oh, everything is the worst, right? He's doing this in antitrust policy. He's doing this in a bunch of other areas, and I'm just sort of like, it's fundamentally very annoying to have to talk about a political leader with immense legal control of our society who is completely unreliable, because how do you even talk about it? You never know what he's doing. And when he says something, it might be true and it might not be true. And it's like, it's actually really hard to have a conversation premised that there's any truth at all. And not to get like deep, I'm not trying to get deep or anything. I'm just annoyed.
We'll end it there. And Matt will not be annoyed next week with another great episode of Organized Money.
Organized Money. Hey, Ben, can we do a little, sign up for Organized Money and have you insert that as like a commercial break?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Right. Just like hard edit it in.
Let's tape that. Do you want us both to do it, or Matt, do you want to do it?
I could do
yourself.
It. Yeah.
Okay. I think, but David, it's nice to have you chime in too.
I will chime in. I will chime.
Sounds good. So we love doing Organized Money, and we have a wonderful production team at Rock Creek Productions that makes us sound good. A lot of you have signed up for our email list. Some of you have signed up to support us with money so that we can finance this and make it sound good. Please, sorry, I should start over. So we love doing Organized Money.
Matt, sorry, it is Rock Creek Sound, not Rock.
Oh, Rock Creek Sound.
Yes.
Sorry.
There you go.
David, I'm out of it. Why don't you?
All right, I'll do it. Hey, it's Dave. We love doing the show, Organized Money, and we love getting support from our readers, who we're 100% supported by them. Readers. Okay, let me do it again.
Man, we're not. This is not working.
Yeah. I'll do it. Hey, it's Dave. We love doing Organized Money, and we love the support that we get from our listeners. Rock Creek Sound is a fantastic production company, and they help us make this sound great for you guys. And if you go to organizedmoney.fm and help us out with some financial support, we can keep doing this show, and that's what we want to do. And so we appreciate it, and we hope that you can go visit us at organizedmoney.fm and help us out with a donation. Does that work?
That's perfect. I'll put some music on that. It'll sound really nice.
Do you want me to do one so you have a second one, or
Yeah, then you can flip them.
yeah? All right.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Organized Money is completely listener supported, and that means you. We love doing this work, but it costs money. And so if you want to help us out at organizedmoney.fm, so you can sign up, get emails every time an episode is released. You also get emails with transcripts and videos and things like that. And then if you think it's worth it, you can kick in a few bucks and help us sound good and expand and get more fun guests to talk about our consolidated economy. Thanks a lot.
Cool.
All right, great.
All right.
Cool.
Great.
And we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yep.
All
Ciao.
right, bye.
Organized money.